Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Okay.
Thank you.
Your
Right,
sound's
so,
not. About
say-
the, your sound isn't coming clearly.
the sound is still not coming clearly?
No.
Okay, give me 1 second. 1 second. How about now?
That's
Much
not
better.
better.
Okay.
Turn the volume down. Okay.
Okay. My sincere apologies to technical
No, we're good.
We had us all set up before 8 o'clock, and then my computer shut down and wasn't starting back up. So my sincere apologies.
My eardrums will try not to hold a grudge.
Never hold a grudge.
Okay, so let's once again. I surely hope this is not going to happen again. Although with that computer, it could always happen. But that's the best computer for me to use. Let's get on to it. I want to start off with a story about a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Now, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was the father of the Musar movement. The father of the Musar movements means that he was all there about teaching people how to live ethically and guiding people and in ways to improve their connection to Hashem. Now, I'm going to say on the outset that his approach was not a Hasidic approach, and that's important to know. It was the opposite to the Hasidic approach, but it's a very important approach. And it's not that Hasidic doesn't believe in the concept, doesn't hold in the Muslim movement. We do, it's a topic on its own, but it's coming a little bit from a negative perspective about the negative sides or the repercussions of not doing the world, while we try to have just a different focus. However, there's a big need for it, and at times in Hasidism, we use Musar as well as an added-on subject. Okay, so the story about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is that he was once driving on the train, and there was a young person sitting next to him, a young Jewish religious man sitting next to him that was making fun of him, causing issues, and he was, to say the least, very unrespectable to him. After he got off the train and he arrived at the location, this young man finds out that this person that he'd been disrespectful to and somewhat abused was none other than the great Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And he was very remorseful, and he came and he apologized. And afterwards, sorry, is there something wrong with the screen or what I'm showing?
We just see you.
Oh.
Oh, that's very nice.
No worries. Afterwards, this man came to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and he said to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, I apologize. And then he came and he asked for Rabbi Yisrael's guidance, and Rabbi Yisrael found out what he was there for. He came, he needed guidance with regards to getting a job. Rabbi Yisrael went out of his way more than he would have ever done to help anybody else, to help him find a job. And the people, his followers, his students, were very surprised. Like, it wasn't the normal way of the rabbi working so hard to help this young individual. And he said the following. He says, the Torah teaches us that we're not allowed to hold a grudge. And I was very concerned that I may hold a grudge against this person because of the way this person treated me. And therefore, I went out of my way to be extra kind to this person to make sure that I'm not holding a grudge. That's a remarkable story, but I could tell you that it's not a one-off story. Very often, great rabbis and teachers were meticulous about this type of behavior. That when somebody had apparently or could be suspiciously inappropriate towards them or didn't behave politely towards them, they would try extra hard to be kind and nice to them. Why is that? Because of the pasuk that says that you're not allowed to take revenge or hold a grudge. So here's the thing. There's two laws that appear in Vayikra. I'm not going to open it right now because I've already taken up so much time from this class. Vayikra, pasuk, chapter 19, verse 18. It says over there, do not take revenge or hold a grudge. Now, let me explain to you what is revenge and what is a grudge. Revenge is quite straightforward. We all know what revenge is. Somebody steals from you $200 and you go and take $200 back from them, or worse, you go and get them into some serious trouble. That is the concept of revenge. Revenge is very straightforward. Holding a grudge is much more subtle. Holding a grudge is a feeling that you have towards other people. So it says, the Torah says, if somebody has done something wrong to you, not only are you not supposed to not take revenge, but you shouldn't even hold a grudge against them. Now, in one of our previous shurim, I think it was on Thursday, I mentioned the point called Midut HaChasidut. Midut HaChasidut means going above and beyond the normal way of behavior. And sometimes people act in a way which is above and beyond. So you would think that not holding a grudge is something which goes above and beyond. However, the Torah tells us, no, it's actually the letter of the law. It's not some rabbinical teaching. It's a straightforward. And for that reason, I really wanted to show it to you. And if I get a chance, I will show it to you. So, give me 1 second. The example that's given, I want to just show it to you inside. The example that's given to understand this concept is as follows. If somebody comes to you and says, can I borrow your spade? And you say, sure, you can borrow my spade. So that's fine. If somebody comes to you and says, can I borrow your spade? And you say no. And the next day, you come to somebody and you say, can I borrow your spade? And the person says no. And the next day, the person says, can I borrow your spade? You say no. You say, you didn't lend me your spade. I'm not going to lend you my spade. That is revenge. What's a grudge? The person comes to you and says, can I borrow your spade? And you say, sorry, the person comes to you, let me start again. You go to the person and say, can I borrow your spade? And the person says no. The next day, your neighbor comes to you and says, can I borrow your spade? And you say, I'm not going to be like you who didn't lend me your spade. I will lend you the spade. That is called Natira, holding a grudge. So let me actually show you how Rashi explains this concept inside. He says as follows. Just going to share my screen. Okay. Look over here. If you remember this verse, look at this this verse. This is a very famous verse in the Torah. The verse is Lo tikom v'lo titor. Do not take revenge and do not hold a grudge. Now, what's fascinating about this verse is it actually comes in the same line as one of the most famous lines in all of Torah. V'yahavta l'reacha kamocha. To love your fellow as yourself. You see where it says v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha? Love your fellow as yourself. If you want to come to the concept of loving your fellow as yourself, as the Torah wants, you have to first understand what it means not to take revenge and not to hold a grudge. Let's look at this inside. Look what Rashi says. And I'll read it in the English. Shall take revenge. For example, he says to him, lend me your sickle. And the latter replies, no. The next day, the latter says to him, lend me your axe. And he says to him, I will not lend it to you, just as you do not lend it to me. This constitutes revenge. Now, and what constitutes bearing a grudge? For example, he says to him, lend me your axe. And the latter replies, no. The next day, the latter says to him, lend me your sickle. Now, if he says to him, here it is for you, I am not like you who did not lend it to me. This constitutes bearing a grudge. For, and this is really important, he keeps the hatred in his heart, even though he does not take revenge. Does that sound like to me, it's a very powerful statement.
What happens if you know that number 1 says 5 times no? Sorry, the first person has 5 spades. You ask him 5 days in a row, can I borrow one of them? And he says 5 times no. Then he comes to you and he says, can I borrow your spade once? And you say, sure. Are you not teaching him being selfish?
Well, it seems like you're doing the logical thing to do, right? I think that what you're saying is a logical response. However, the Torah thinks differently. And what I'm saying is, I think that it's a little bit of a paradigm shift that the Torah is expecting from us. The normal way, I once read a book from a very, 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 very famous person, Donald Trump. I once read a book from Donald Trump. And just one thing, it was an older book he wrote quite a few years ago. I don't even remember what the book was called, but I remember reading excerpts of it. And he wrote something there. If somebody does something wrong to you in business or in life, and if you let them get away with it, you are not going to teach them a lesson, and other people will later on take advantage of you. And I could tell you that when I read that book at the time, and I don't know if I remember if I read the whole book or whatever it was, I really did not like that point. Like Donald Trump or not, and I'm sure there were lots of good ideas, and some people like him or they don't like him, whatever it is. But I remember just the way he said it, and he brought that idea that sometimes we feel like the best way to respond to a person that has wronged us is by putting them in their place, teaching them a lesson. And I think that's the way most people think. So I think it's the normal way of thinking, but I do believe it's the wrong way of thinking. Now, do I always behave in this way? I wish I did. I wish I can say that I was perfect, but I do believe that in the long run, we would be more successful, because it says, what is the entire purpose of the Torah, says Rabbi Akiva? The entire purpose of the Torah is to love your fellow as yourself. First thing you got to do is you have to get hatred out of your heart. As long as there's some type of hatred in your heart, how are you supposed to love your fellow as yourself? Sorry, I'm competing with the printer. How are we supposed to love our fellow as ourselves if we are in a place where we don't have wholesomeness inside? There's things inside us that are really bothering us. It's really the same law as love your fellow as yourself. That's what I understand the Torah to be saying. If the Torah says love your fellow as yourself, and that's the most important law in the Torah, or that's the general law of the entire Torah, both Rabbi Hillel, both Rabbi Akiva, both the Rebbe of the Babish, the Baal Shem Tov, most of the greatest giants in Judaism have told us that the most important law in Torah, or the most general law in Torah, is to love your fellow Jew. Rabbi Akiva, Hillel, the Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai talks about it a lot. He's a student of the author of the Zohar. Many, many people talk about this concept. The Baal Shem Tov taught it. So this is what my answer to your question is, Fritz, and I'm really glad that you brought it up. The normal way of thinking is that you reply to a slap with a slap. You reply to a stick with a stick. That's the normal way of thinking. The Rebbe taught that when you reply to a stick with a stick, what you get back is another stick. You don't necessarily go any further. When you reply to a stick with a kiss, and I'm not talking about in unique situations like the Palestinian people. I'm not talking about that. Hamas. I'm not talking about that. That's a separate topic. I'm talking about your fellow Jew, your neighbor next door, your friend next door. What it ends up doing is it ends up changing the way that person thinks. And I've mentioned the story before, just to finish off Fritz's question of this member. I think he was a member of Congress in the U.S. or he was a senator. I can't remember if he was a member of Congress or a senator, but he was big up in the government, and he wrote and he was pushing some really anti-Israel laws. And the Rebbe wrote him a letter which was very praiseworthy and very kind and generous and respectable. And Professor Alan Dershowitz wrote a letter to the Rebbe saying, how can you do this? Here you have a person that is going and working against the Jewish people and actively, and you going and embracing him. The Rebbe said, I hear what you are saying. Let us see whose response is correct. Your response was an attack on him. My response was to embrace him. Let's see what happens. In other words, so that's what Alan Dershowitz says. This man transformed into the greatest lover of Israel, and I forget his name, and that's just apologize. It's written in the book, Rebbe by Joseph Soloveitchik, the story. He transformed into a lover of Israel and the Jewish people. And later on, Alan Dershowitz says, I then saw the Rebbe's approach. When a person was so against Judaism and the way he transformed, and the Rebbe said how you have the power to be so influential in the area, etc., etc. Okay, so I think that it's it goes against the normal way of thinking. It's not necessarily the logical approach, but ultimately it's the approach that it works. That when somebody does something wrong, as long as we're going to take revenge and grudge, by the way, some of the commentators say that the reason why the Torah forbids revenge is because as long as we have revenge, the cycle never stops. Because this one person does something wrong, you do something wrong back, and they have to do something wrong. As if the Torah would have not forbade revenge and grudge, the cycle of evil would never stop. And the Torah commands us that somebody has to be the one to stop it. And the way to stop it ultimately is by removing it from your heart, from the way you feel. And that's why when somebody has wronged you and you go out of your way to be extra kind to them, and that's not necessarily the law that you have to be out of your way. But when you do that, you end up transforming the feeling inside of you from negative to positive. And that's the only way that the cycle can stop. If we want to achieve peace and love in the world, we cannot respond to evil and hurt with evil. It simply is not, it's not a response. It just brings upon us more evil. Okay? So hopefully that answers this question. The Torah teaches us a concept on this and says like this. The reason why we have to stop having revenge or getting upset is because when we're in the moment, if we know beforehand that we're not supposed to hold a grudge and that prevents us, then we will afterwards be able to look at the whole concept from a more real Jewish perspective, which then would teach us that ultimately we should not have got upset in the first place. And gives an example of this. When we were children, we used to get upset at every single little thing. when my kids are crying every 5 minutes. Why? This kid broke down my block's building. This kid did this. Everyone's crying every 5 minutes. But what happens? They get upset. And one of the great things about kids is they don't stay angry for long. Right? They get over their anger and then they move on. That's the way of children. But when we look back at it as adults and we look at what they're getting upset about, we say, hold on, it's worthless. Why are you getting upset? But we know in our mind that to that child, it must be worth something. So we kind of acknowledge it. And we shouldn't just blow away somebody else's pain and suffering. We could never blow away or push away or be inconsiderate to somebody's own pain and suffering. So when we see that from the perspective of the child, and we see how they're getting upset, but we know that in the bigger perspective that it's not a big deal. It's not as meaningful as they think it is. What does that allow us to do? That allows us to think about our situations and the times when we get upset, that most of the time, and there are exceptions. There are exceptions of people that do really bad and horrible things to another person. But most of the time, the reason why people get upset is for small reasons, not big reasons. You know, somebody once told me, one of the great things about having a big family is that usually there's much less machlokas in the family. This is just a little secret. Why am I saying that? And I'm not trying to insult anybody that has a small family. But there's a certain truth to it, and I've experienced it in my own family. Anybody that has a big family would have known this experience. When you have a big family, nobody remains upset for too long, generally. Of course, once again, there's always exceptions. In small families, it's more common that when somebody upsets you in the family, it stays for much longer. Why is that? Because in the small, and this is not scientific or Torah-based, this is just my own idea that I've heard from somebody. I happen to think that there's truth in it. When you're in a big family, let's say my family, 10 kids, when somebody gets upset at somebody else, and we find out, and this has happened, that somebody's upset at another person in the family. Once one of my older sisters got really upset at somebody else in the family, and she decides she's not talking to them. What happens? The one that she's upset at tries to call, she's not entertaining the calls. Okay, that's normal life. We don't take the other person. We're upset at them, we don't take their calls. But what happens? Everybody else is not upset at. So she takes their calls and they talk to them about it and they listen to them. And before they know it, they're like, you know what, let's make up, it's not so bad. They have the go-between, and Shalom Al Yisrael is forgotten. It's one of the blessings of a big family, because you have the person to go between that's able to, there's always somebody that's there to make it up. Because if you're going to cut off from one person, you'll end up having to cut off from too many people. Okay, so it's a blessing. But the point is that in all of our lives, we have the ability to decide. The Torah is telling us, and I'm not saying this, but this is the way I understand it, and I think it's a really important law. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm doing this topic, it's not because I thought it was a relevant topic to anybody in particular. The reason why I'm doing it, because I went back to, I couldn't think of a topic for Shiurim, and then I remembered that before I got distracted a few weeks ago, I was actually doing in the order of the mitzvot, and this was the next mitzvah in the order. That's why we're doing this topic. But the concept of acknowledging that there's somebody's done something wrong to me, and it's bothering me, and I haven't done anything about it, or and I'm holding a grudge against them, is against the Torah. So what do? To me, it's a really difficult law. Just like loving your fellow as yourself is a difficult law. The difference is loving your fellow as yourself is a positive commandment. Either you do it or you don't do it. It's like whatever. But if you're holding grudges, it's different, because that's a negative. That's a negative commandment. In other words, by actually holding the grudge, you're transgressing. So therefore, it seemingly is more serious. So what are you supposed to do if somebody's actually wronged you? What are you actually supposed to do? So Rambam writes about this. I don't have the source in front of me, but Maimonides writes this in his book of Halacha. In other words, not just his psychological books, his books on philosophy, his book on halakha. He writes, if somebody has wronged you, then you have an obligation to go up to the person and tell them you have wronged me. This is why I'm upset at you. Not to say you are bad, not to say I'm, anything, calling them names, you're bad, how dare you do this, to express your perspective, to say, I am upset. Because if you don't do that, then the cycle continues. You'll never be able to get rid of the hatred within your heart. Because half the time, if you don't, and that's really a difficult thing to do. That's really the most difficult part of this whole lesson. The Torah is telling us, from my understanding, is that if somebody did do something wrong to you, and people do, so what are you supposed to do it? So what are you supposed to do about it? What you're supposed to do about it is to go up to that person. First of all, if you could find within yourself to forgive that person, that's one thing. But you have an obligation to go up to that person and tell them about why you're upset. Tell them that you're upset about this particular thing.
Some people don't want to listen though.
That's true.
Because of age
Why don't people want to listen?
because of age and mental capacity that is failing. I have this problem.
But also because they don't think this way too. So just because you think this way, they might not. So they might not reciprocate the same.
Sorry, my internet cut out for a second over there, Nach, when you started talking. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah, I said that you could be doing it, and you could be doing the right thing by going and saying, hey, look, you upset me, whatever, and you have your expectations of how things should go. But they might not think the same way as you.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that the cycle is finished by you doing it. But
100%.
I wasn't going to get into it because I think it takes a lot more than just a couple of comments.
No. Okay, so let me just explain to this. And I understand that it's a lot easier said than done. Okay, I fully get that. And I'm in the same boat as you. I know that when I have issues with people, I don't. So there's a few things to bear in mind. There's a few things to bear in mind in my understanding this law. As I say, it's not as straightforward, and I get that. I'm not saying that anybody that doesn't do this is doing something. This is what Torah says to do. Now, practically, what does it mean? What does it mean? It's a difficult law. To me, it's a difficult law. Not holding a grudge is a particularly difficult law. It's one thing to say, don't take revenge. Okay, fine, don't take revenge. That's an easier, more understandable law than not to hold a grudge. I struggle personally with the concept of telling people not to hold a grudge. So therefore, my question is, what does the Torah suggest about it? So the Torah suggests two things, in my understanding. Number one, think about what the problem is. What did the person wrong you? And go and find a way to tell them what's bothering you about what they did. But here's the thing. That's the first trial. And 100% the Torah is not saying that the person will reciprocate. Torah is not saying that the person will definitely respond good to you. But what the Torah is saying is, if the person doesn't know that you've wronged them and how you've wronged them, then you cannot expect them to ever rectify it. It's our obligation to give them the opportunity to apologize, to let them know what they've done wrong. If you're going to just hold a grudge against somebody and they don't know about it, then how are they supposed to rectify it? How is the situation ever going to be? Half the time, probably more than half the time, I would say probably about 85% of the time when people get upset of other people, I'm talking about normal, healthy people, the person had no intention of upsetting them. 85% of the time. And that's
Sometimes
not a scientific...
they do though.
Sorry?
Sometimes they do.
Sometimes. I did leave 15% of times for the people do it. But you know what? For those 85% of the time that when the people do it without intention, unintentionally, how many times would we hold on to, I can tell you so many stories of people that held on to regret for years and grudges and for years. And people didn't even know why they were
I hear
upset.
you. I hear you.
So the first thing to do is this, is to actually open up to the person and say that you're upset. Now, how to say it is a whole nother program. As you can't just go up, say, and once again, you can't go with an accusing finger. You can't say, do you know that you're an absolute, a ... and you're this and that. That's not going to work. That's just attacking the person, and it's going to make the situation worse. You might as well be quiet. If you can go up to the person, and there's ways to do it in ways that are not so offensive, by saying, I want you to know, listen, I think you're a good person. And you start off with something positive. I'm always starting off with something positive towards the person. This is not a Torah concept. This is a psychological concept. If you start off by telling the person something positive about them, in connection to this concept, say, I know that you're a good person. You care a lot about your kids, but what you did to me, or I think what you did to my son, etc., was particularly hurtful. Or the way you made me feel. I know that you're not an aggressive person. By starting off and putting the person's guard down and saying something positive, and then afterwards saying, but I felt hurt by what you did. So what are you saying? It's about me, right? It's about me, the way I felt. That's the way to do it. I don't want to get into this discussion for another. I once gave a course, a JLI course on communication, and there we could get into it at length. But obviously it's easier said than done, and if it's not done right, it's going to make things worse. Agreed. But
Absolutely.
the first thing is to do it, and to figure out how to do it in a way that's not going to be hurtful, and to get over it. Because ultimately, when a person harbors a feeling of hatred or a grudge or something against another person, that doesn't do them well. For me, I'm doing against my own. There's certain studies that they've done that they find that certain type of cancers can be sometimes cured, and I don't want to say this as anything scientific, don't take me for it, but there's certain type of cancers and health issues that can be cured by simply taking away those negative feelings towards other people. And I believe this, and I believe that concept. As I said, I don't know if you can prove it scientifically, but I believe the concept. Because most physical issues start with a spiritual and mental issue. That is a Torah concept. So therefore, when we hold the grudge, we ultimately end up doing harm to ourselves. Now, what happens if the person doesn't respond? That's in the next conversation. Yes, no.
So I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think that, well, first of all, before that, what you were touching about disease or cancer, I think disease, within the word disease, you'll find dis-ease. So the dis-ease starts in your head, and then it becomes disease in a physical manifestation. But what I was going to say is the second thing that you touched upon. It's not necessarily the outcome of making shalom, making peace, but it's for your own preservation. So just in the fact that you're holding a grudge, it's going to manifest itself in so many different ways. You're going to avoid that person. You're going to rob yourself of so many different things along the way and cause so many regrets that really it's going to do you harm more so than towards working towards an outcome or a favorable outcome as you would expect it. So I think the Torah there, it should be a whole topic on its own. I'm surprised it's in the same, that revenge and holding grudges in the same pasuk. I think it deserves a pasuk on its own because it's really for your own self-preservation rather than put the two together. But obviously, Torah knows what it's doing. But I think it's such a big thing. It's such a big thing that it deserves its own
100%. Well, the Torah is not, and I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. Just on the concept of a pasuk on its own, the Torah is not limited to how much we could learn from one pasuk, right? So certain pasukim, like this particular pasuk, it's probably one of the most spoken about pasukim in all of Torah. but more so because of the later words, which is that when you love your fellow as yourself, and what's the understanding of it? And here I want to get into a little bit of a Hasidic discussion. And the Hasidus says about the concept of love your fellow as yourself. How can you love your fellow as yourself, right? That's the Hasidic question. How's it? That's not just Hasidic question. It's everyone asks that question. You love yourself. And the answer is, when you do something wrong, the worst thing you can do for yourself is to hold a grudge against yourself. Now, I acknowledge that most people's biggest problem, more than holding grudges against other people, is the fact that we're having grudges against ourselves. And we have negative voices inside, 100%.
Agreed.
And the truth is, when we work on having positive voices for ourselves, when we don't have negative voices and we deal with the negative voices inside our own heads and the grudges against our own, have some personal love and positivity towards ourselves, that's when we'll be a lot easier to help others. Agreed. Yes,
I was just going to say, I agree with what you're saying, but what if you're dealing with someone who's got narcissistic tendencies, and whatever you do is going in for you or the family, for whatever reason it's in his head, because he's narcissistic type of personality. How do we get around that one?
I don't have an answer to your question. But I think the principle still remains. I do believe that the principle remains that in line with the concept of if he's acting like the Palestinians, and I'm just giving that as an example of people that they need to be given a heavy hand, in my opinion. That's all they understand, but that's because of their education. And there is a space for the concept of a heavy hand within Judaism at times. If that's what the person needs, yes, there's space for that. However, in general, I would say even the narcissistic person is struggling with their own identity. Okay? They have their own identity crisis. And because of that own identity crisis, they're pushing it onto other people.
How do you overcome that?
With lots of love and devotion and care.
And
in the long run, that's the way you overcome it.
And what if they say you give your love, you're obsessed, you're narcissistic, they blame others for their problem, and you're putting your nose in our lives? Don't do that, we don't want you. How do you go from there?
Well, if a person doesn't want you in their life, then that's probably the best thing you should do for them at that point.
What if it is your son?
What is if it is your son? I think at that point, you probably just have to pray. You have to say in very clear and warm language, I want you to know that I love you and that I'm there for you. And if there's anything I can do for you, I will always be there for you. And then you got to pray. Because if you're going to be in the life of somebody when they don't want it, it probably won't be helpful. Right?
Could I suggest an extension of that is go talk to a professional,
yes.
A mental health professional? I think it's very important. The Torah has all the answers, but as humans, we don't necessarily know how to unlock all the answers. And somewhere in there will be talk to the people who can provide some practical help. In answer, I've been staying very quiet through this, but a month or two ago, I dealt with a very difficult situation, a fellow carer who was actually murdered by her son. And she tried everything to look after him and do all the right things, and he killed her. He's now in custody. So there's an extreme example of, the Torah, turn the other cheek, however you want to express it. There's a limit to how far you can go in providing support to someone else. But if you drop your own guard too much, you can definitely be in danger. And then there's a need to talk to a mental health professional or other authorities who can navigate that. That's something, personal feeling, that's something that until recently the Jewish community has really struggled with, because the assumption would be that all the answers in the Torah, or they're all in the Hasidic way of life, or whatever. And yes, they may be. The answers may be there, but they're very subtle and deeply buried and difficult to tease out. And so that's my own suggestion, is treat it like any other safety or urgent situation and ask for that help.
Okay, I agree with you. I agree with you very strongly that definitely people should be seeking help, and I do believe that if you can find the right help, there is help. In other words, I don't think that we should be undermining the mental health world in general. However, I think it is really important to get the right person, and I think that's an understatement. I don't know how important it is to get the right person, to the right research, but that's the difficult thing. You know, the difficult people, the good people are hard to get to, right? They're fully booked type of thing. But
that's absolutely a problem. Now, I just want to look at the pasuk, the last few words of the pasuk, after Lerecha Kamocha, but it doesn't finish there. Of course, it says Ani Hashem.
Yeah.
Now, why does it finish like that?
Okay, I don't want to get into that for two reasons. I don't have clarity on that myself. I think I spoke about that when I spoke about the class when we have to Lerecha Kamocha.
Can I suggest
I think
a reason?
If you look in Rashi, it says something about the fact that if you look over here, I don't get too much into it, as I said. Rashi may say something about it, does he?
If not, I respectfully suggest, well, the point Noah made earlier is that this two-pronged approach, you know, that if you hold a grudge, it's bad for you, it's self-destructive. And who knows best how it's self-destructive? The one who created us. That's
right. Well, I think Ani Hashem, and I've looked up this commentary in the past, talks about how it says I am God, saying I am God and I know, about the wrong that other people have done, and I know, that I have created you and I come from you, and you come from me, and therefore you shouldn't worry about what that person's getting or taking the revenge or holding the grudge, because Hashem will take care of it. No, that's his job. The punishment and the revenge, etc., and knowing what the person deserves, etc., that's his problem, but that's not our problem. Okay, I think that's the one commentary I may have seen once. But I want to just conclude with this one.
Some battles you just.
Sorry.
Some battles you just can't win.
Oh, I lost internet.
Some battles you can't win.
Some battles you can't win.
Or some brightnesses you can't fix.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not saying that. I think it's important to understand that we're talking about in the general situation over here. And if there are extreme situations where people have done serious wrong, that has to be dealt with on a one-on-one basis. I'm not saying anything over here for very specific cases. I want you to understand the way what I'm understanding the meaning of this law from a Torah's perspective. This is the way I understand it. Maybe another rabbi will understand it differently, but this is the way I understand it based on what I've studied about this law. And this is the general approach. Of course, there are some people that are beyond this way of approaching them. And if you look at the next verse, I'll show you once again. If you look at the next verses, look what it says. Sorry, the verse before it, Hocheach tochiach et hamisecha. You shall surely rebuke your fellow. Right? That's the verse just beforehand. These are all connected. So there is place for rebuke and for telling off. But the Torah is saying, if somebody's done something wrong and that bothers you, instead of holding a grudge, tell the person. Because when you tell the person, the grudge is now going on to them. They know what it is. It's now their responsibility to activate. Now, what happens if the person does something wrong, and you've done all you can to let the person know about how they've done something wrong to you and why you're upset at them or whatever it is, and hopefully you've done it in the right way, because that's the only way it's going to actually be successful. Now what? So, excuse me. So then the Torah says, now what your job is just to love him. For you have to l'reacha kamocha. Now that's going beyond what we can normally do. You've done what you have to do. You've gotten rid of the grudge by letting the person know, and now your job is to give love. That's what the Torah says. That's the way I understand it. So the Torah's advice is to say, I've done what I can do, and now the rest is up to Hashem. Now, of course, if the situation is an unhealthy situation where the person is continuously taking advantage of you and continuously being narcissistic and doesn't want you and pushing you away, that's it. But love never stops. It's like saying, I'm going to take revenge on my arm for, or let's say when you walk and you hurt yourself as you're walking, and you kick your foot into the other foot, or you bite your tongue as you're walking, you're going to go and I'm going to now chop out my teeth for biting my tongue. Right? Have you ever bitten your tongue? How painful is it? You do it less and less, hopefully. But it's painful, right? So you could just go and chop your teeth because it hurt me, or you could go and hurt you if you're banging a nail and you hit your one hand hits the other hand, you can hurt yourself. But you recognize that by hurting yourself, the arm that hurt you is going to hurt you even worse. So the Torah says, if you recognize this, why do you love your fellows as yourself? Because you are truly one and the same person. You are brothers. You are one and the same. You're from the same family. You're the same body. And just like if one part of the body hurts another part of the body, taking revenge or holding a grudge against other part of the body is not going to help. But you should find out how you can best deal with the situation within yourself. The same thing is with your fellow man. When your fellow brother, your Jewish brother or sister, does something wrong to you and wrongs you, first thing to do is to let them know, and then to show love. That's the best that we can do. Getting upset and moving, and it's not what the Torah wants from us, because it's not healthy for us, it's not healthy for them, and ultimately doesn't end the cycle of negativity. It ultimately will not end that cycle of negativity.
Well done.
So there's a few other points that I got a little bit distracted today. The truth is I prepared a whole bunch of other notes, but I went a little bit off topic because of the questions which I thought were more important to discuss. So I'll just say a few last points quickly. The concept of holding a grudge against your fellow is considered in Torah that it's like what ultimately ends up causing a civil war. In other words, when people are harboring negative feelings against other people, it eventually boils over and leads to further negative situations. So that's the negative cycle. We think that just revenge, oh, that's a problem. But the grudge, what's so big deal? It's just me. But we've already spoken about how it harms us, but ultimately it will come out. Because if you don't speak about it, let's say the person's doing something, and half the time when a person's doing something against you, they don't even know that they're doing that negativity against you. Ultimately, it's probably going to recur if you don't speak to them about it. The chances are, if we don't talk about it, it will happen again. And therefore, it will ultimately lead to a war. And the worst type of wars. In brotherly wars, inbuilt wars, in-house wars. We know the worst type of wars often are civil wars. You know, in America, in the Civil War, 620,000 people died in the US. That's more than all the other US wars put together. Because there's something which is particularly bad about an in-house war. You know, sometimes it's easier to love the enemy on the other side than to love your brother next door. And if we don't start with our closest people, our neighbors, our friends, our families, etc., to get rid of those issues, eventually it rolls over into worse situations and could be a lot worse. And eventually, the Torah is saying it even leads to what ends up becoming civil wars. And if you look throughout Jewish history, there's always been people that have been terrible to the Jewish people. But at times when the Jewish people were together, were united, it was very difficult for people to touch us. But when we were internally quarreling and fighting, we were much weaker. And at times, even the internal wars were harmful to ourselves, literally. They themselves caused the damage. So what's the exception? Is there ever an exception of when a person is either allowed to there's no exception for holding a grudge, but taking revenge. The Torah gives us, from my understanding, two exceptions. There are exceptions. Amalek, yes, but I don't think that's considered. Is it considered yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Well,
there's yeah. So you actually, now you say it's actually called by the Midyanim, which we read about 2 weeks ago in the Torah, that we actually have to take. The Torah says to take revenge on them for what they did against the Jewish people, and that's what I would possibly put into the Palestinian example. That if they're going to harm us, we have to put them in the position that they should not stop doing that. Midyan, the Midianites. And interestingly enough, and I pointed this out in Shul, it wasn't against the Moabites, because the Moabites didn't just try to do harm for no reason. They actually were afraid of the Jewish people, while the Midianites harmed us for no good reason. And that's why we were particularly, there's two nations in general that we were told to take revenge against: Amalek, as Noach pointed out, and Midian. Why? Because they were just purely evil against the very essence of the Jewish people and God's existence. That was a pure evil. They had no personal benefit from fighting us. They had no reason to fear us. We weren't trying to take anything from them. Okay. The other example was the Plishtim in the case of Shimshon. Shimshon HaGibor, Samson the Mighty, famously takes his last and final revenge, his sweetest revenge. I suppose it's considered one of the sweetest revenges in all of history, when he's been abused to a certain degree by his wife, taken advantage, and she lies to him. And as a result, he says she gives away his secret about why he's so strong, and his trinket is his hair, etc. And the whole story of Shimshon. And then what's his final prayer is when he's caught and they've gouged out his eyes, and they're making a big party, and they make him dance publicly in front of all of them. He asks them to lie him down, tied up between the two beams holding up the whole building. And when he lies down, he prays to Hashem, God, please give me my last drop of strength, that I should be able to revenge them for what they have done to the Jewish people. So that was a famous example of the Torah, where he ends up taking those two beams and causing the whole building to collapse as a result. Unfortunately, from recent history, that seems like something that is very possible when you have beams holding up big buildings. The final example where the Torah tells us where there is space for revenge is when you're standing up for the honor of the Torah. The Torah says, let's understand that if a scholar or the Torah has been insulted, we cannot just step by and allow it to go to be treaded upon. We must stand up for the honor of the Torah. Now, what this means exactly, I don't know. I don't know if it means literally revenge. I don't think it means literally revenge, but it means that we have an obligation to defend the Torah. So we have an obligation to defend truth, to stand up for truth, and to stand up for the Torah and for our fellow Jews, etc. That's the way I understand it. And when you see something that's dishonoring, being disrespectful in a way to a Torah scholar, to the Torah, to Judaism as a whole, we are obligated to stand up for that, for truth. Of course, from the story of the destruction of the temple, we know that we have to make sure that nobody is ever embarrassed and shamed anybody and love everybody, etc., because we know that the whole temple, which we just came from, was the destruction of the temple was called by hatred one to the other. And the way that the temple is supposed to be rebuilt is through love to your fellow. So that concept applies to all people. But my understanding is that when it comes to Judaism as a whole or to the Torah as a whole, it's our obligation to not let people get away with that disrespect. What does that mean? I don't exactly know. I'm sure if such a thing happens, I think we would know what the right thing is to do in those situations. There's one final law that I like to conclude with, going back to our topic. There's a law which I don't have the exact pasuk for right now. I think it's quite close to where we're holding in the Torah right now, in the Leviticus, and that pasuk that I showed you. But it says like this: if you are walking down the road and you see two donkeys that are overloaded with wares, and the one donkey belongs to your friend and the other donkey belongs to your enemy, who should you help first?
Your enemy.
Your enemy. I think that's just such a powerful law. It's a powerful law in a sense that it's a major paradigm shift to the way you think. Normally, we would want to go and help our friend. And the Torah says, no, it's the person that's wronged you. That's the person that you have to go and help first. So I think it's clear. Okay. At the very least, I did not give you any mental health advice tonight or any scientific or professional advice, but I hopefully did give you food for thought, and that was my intention. I gave myself some food for thought, and thanks for the great conversations. So have a good night. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Questions, comments, points, you're welcome to ask.
You, Rabbi.
Everybody else is welcome to leave, but thank you so much. Have a good night.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I've got a question for you.
Go
But
ahead.
if you
Good
don't
night. Good
mind,
night.
I'll wait a little bit.
Okay. Did you want everyone to go, or do you want this to be a public question?
Preferable private.
Okay.
I'll also speak to you another time privately.
Okay. No worries. No worries.
No, thank
Maybe
you.
have a good night. No, thanks.
Bye.
Just then turn off the Facebook feed as well. Okay. Have a good night. 1 second.